Good evening, everybody. It's Monday, Monday with Jesus.
Here we are. Hi, folks.
The story we have this today is for the third Sunday in Advent. That's from the Gospel of John. So Tom's going to tell it for us.
Right. This is the story. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear testimony to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not himself the light, but he came to testify to the light. And this was the testimony of John when the Judeans sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" And he confessed. He did not deny, but he confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they said, "Well, what then? Who are you? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." They said, are you then the prophet?" He said, "No." And they said, "Well, who are you then? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" And he said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, 'Make straight the path of the Lord,' as Isaiah said." And now these had come from the Pharisees. And they asked him, "Why then are you baptizing if you are not neither Elijah nor the prophet nor the Messiah?" And John replied, "I baptize with water, but among you stands one whom you do not know, who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandals." Now, this happened in Bethany, east of the Jordan, where John was baptizing.
Oh, thank you, Tom. That's the story.
That's the
And
story.
like I said, it's for Advent, season of Advent, but it doesn't have anything to do with the baby born in a manger. It doesn't particularly even seem like it has anything to do with the coming of the Son of Man, like last week's story did. So why do you think this was picked to be part of the lectionary during Advent?
Well, my hunch is that it's because John was a prophet of what was coming, of Jesus. And that this sets the coming of Jesus in the context of his later ministry, rather than just in relation to his birth. And so there's a way in which John is the fulfillment of the prophetic tradition. And so he embodies the prophets of Israel. And so this is then the prophetic testimony to Jesus as the Messiah.
So that makes John have sort of an important position, but on the other hand, the story sounds a little bit like it's not exactly putting John down, but kind of clearly having him be not as important as Jesus. Is that what would you say about that? John's position, I guess, his status in relation to the gospel.
Well, this has often been seen and interpreted as a Christian put down of the John the Baptist tradition, and more broadly of Judaism. And seen then in the context of the the reconstructed conflict between Christianity and Judaism. I think that is wrongheaded. That's based on the assumption that this split had happened between Christianity and Judaism before 70. John was written sometime 90. The conflict had developed, but there was still not a split. And John is clearly, this emerges from a performance criticism study, is clearly addressing his story to the broad Jewish community in the Greco-Roman world. So this is an appeal to the followers of John the Baptist, who were another Jewish sect. And so there were a number of sects, Jewish sects, that survived the war, and the followers of John the Baptist. And so this is John the evangelist, including in his audience the followers of John the Baptist, and making them part of his proclamation of Jesus as the Messiah.
Okay, so the leaders came from Jerusalem, religious leaders came from Jerusalem to ask John about Jesus, to try to figure out who he was. Talk a little bit about John's answer, if you would. First of all, their questions, they rate Elijah, Messiah, they were asking him kind of about Jesus's identity. And how
Well, they weren't asking him about Jesus, they were asking him about him.
Okay.
His identity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, who are you? Are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? Are you the prophet? So Elijah was expected to be the one who would come before the Messiah, would show his way. That's reflected in Mark, with him being identified as one who wore the clothes of camel's hair and so on, and which was character of Elijah. But here in John, he clearly says, no, I'm not Elijah. I'm not the prophet. We don't know who the prophet was. There were a number of prophets, but there isn't anyone who we can identify as far as we know who was, quote, the prophet. But what he does identify is that he is the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way, make straight the way of the Lord. And so he stands in that prophetic tradition as one who is then prophesying that Jesus will emerge. And that's what he then says later. He's already here. He's standing in your midst. You don't know him yet.
So he is subordinating himself to Jesus at this point. Is that accurate? Do we know anything more about John the Baptist, what he was like, other than what you told us?
Well, he was clearly a major figure who had a great impact. And so his testimony to Jesus had a lot of impact for the Jews who were hearing this story. So he's a great intro to Jesus. What he was like, he was kind of a wild man. And there is a strong possibility, and many have proposed this, that Jesus was a student of John the Baptist, which is reflected again in the synoptics, in his coming and being baptized by John. But in John's gospel, he is portrayed as one who is extraordinarily humble and accepts his role as one who is preparing the way for the Lord, and who does not claim status or precedence in relation to him, but clearly takes a role of being a supporter. Later in the gospel, he identifies himself as like the friend of the bridegroom. And so he is one who points his followers and himself as one who is who precedes the Messiah, and who is introducing him, and who is, I don't know, proud to do so, but in a way that is remarkably I don't know, humble.
Yeah, that kind of humility might be a good lesson for followers of Jesus as well.
Yes. And Jesus does take that kind of role later. I mean, he makes extraordinary claims about his relationship to the Father and so on. But he is not one who is extraordinarily aggressive about promoting himself or what he's about.
Yeah. The last line of the story really establishes the setting of the story. It's kind of interesting that we don't get that until the end, that all of this took place in Bethany across the Jordan. Do we know where John was baptizing, I gather? What do we know about this Bethany?
Not much. There has been some speculation about archaeological sites that have been identified that might have been called Bethany, but we don't know of any place called Bethany on the east side of the Jordan. The Bethany that we know of was the Bethany that was 2 miles from Jerusalem, where Jesus and the disciples stayed during what we call Holy Week. During the week of the Passover.
So it's not that Bethany.
It's not that Bethany. It's another Bethany in the wilderness somewhere.
Okay.
So it doesn't, I'd say it doesn't really help us a lot in terms of identifying, other than recognizing that John the Baptist was in the wilderness, on the other side of the Jordan.
On the other side. What are the implications of this story, if there are any, for movements of peace and justice now?
Well, the principal implication of this story is that the kingdom of God is coming, that the government of God in the world is at hand. And what happens in the later parts of the gospel is then that in a number of Jesus' parables, he even implies that it is present now, that is, in his time. At the core of the appeal to norms of justice and peace is this framework of the kingdom of God, of the government of God. And so John the Baptist and Jesus stand as witnesses to that new government, that the gospel proclaims as the good news that Jesus established a spiritual kingdom. Clearly, it's not the kingdom of peace that we all hope for. You can open the window tomorrow morning and look out and see whether peace in the world has dawned. Not yet. And yet there are movements. There is a spiritual power that was released by Jesus' ministry and by the telling of this story that has inspired and transformed the world in significant ways, such as, for example, the hospital system, which was initiated by followers of Jesus. So there are major implications. Another one that I would say is that this is a story that advocates collaboration, and that while he's clearly arguing that the followers of Jesus have some kind of leadership role, it's inclusive. They're working out a way for the followers of John the Baptist and Jesus to collaborate and cooperate in the bearing witness to the coming of the kingdom of God.
Right.
Jesus.
Instead of spending their energy being in competition with each other.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like sometimes happens with social, even like social movements.
Social movements, denominations,
Right.
right. Different ways of approaching appeals for peace and justice. We waste an awful lot of time competing rather than collaborating.
Well, that's a good word for today.
All right.
Thanks everybody for watching. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye.